on the occasion of its 7th world premiere release, audiences will see, as it has never been seen before, the most memorable of all motion picture achievements, Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind is, in many ways, the hallmark of Hollywood's golden age. It was made at the height of the old classical Hollywood era, 1939, which many people believe, I am one of them, may have been the greatest year ever for movies.
There was a land of cavaliers and cotton fields called the Old South. Here, in this pretty world, gallantry took its last bow. Here was the last ever to be seen of knights and their ladies fair.
Movies are much more like short stories than novels. Everything that happens in a movie tends to contribute pretty directly to the advancement of the story and the outcome of that story. Gone with the Wind is probably one of the movies that you know, and again, if you think about the way the story develops in this film, this is a much longer film than was usual at the time. And this is a novel that was an extremely successful, this was a huge bestseller, the biggest bestseller in publishing history at that time. And this is a faithful adaptation of the book. It's a remarkable film to look at. What a movie director does is decide where to put the camera. And if you look closely at any film, like Gone with the Wind, you can begin to appreciate what kinds of decisions a director is making in terms of where to put the camera. And start with the simple stuff like who gets a close-up, you know, literally. And whether we're thinking of it or not when we watch a movie, we know that the characters that get the close-ups are not only the important characters, but those are the characters that we tend to identify with. And which characters get point of view shots. And literally, filmmakers talk about POV or point of view shots. Who gets an over the shoulder shot where the camera's right behind a character looking over his or her shoulder. Now what's happening there is you're getting the point of view of a character. And you are being encouraged by the filmmaker to identify with this or that character. At the same time, the camera will not identify with a particular character, but will show us things objectively. There's a very famous shot in this movie that's showing the aftermath of a terrible battle where there are literally thousands of wounded soldiers littering the streets of a particular city. And the camera very, very, very slowly pulls back into an overhead shot, a crane shot from high overhead, looking down at all of these bodies. Now that's not a character's point of view, but that's clearly a storyteller's point of view, and the storyteller is telling us, look at this. Movies work better, I think the general wisdom has been over the decades, if we simply show the action and the viewer is constantly hypothesizing about what this or that character is thinking, and also it's left up to the viewer to comment on the action him or herself as the movie's being watched. Good filmmaking often involves characters who say one thing and do something else. And where you know, conflict, there's conflict all over the place in good movies. And it's not only between characters who have different viewpoints or different goals, but it's also within an individual character who, again, says one thing and does something else. A good example would be the Rhett Butler character in Gone with the Wind. In this movie, you've got this guy who's a gun runner, he's a mercenary, he's in it for himself. He, very objectively says that the South should not be involved in this war. There's no way that they're going to win this war.
I'm saying very plainly that the Yankees are better equipped than we. They've got factories, shipyards, coal mines, and a fleet to bottle up our harbors and starve us to death.
And by the end of the film, by midway through the film, he's decided to go and fight for this lost cause. If you think about the way movies work, there are a couple of things to really focus on when you're thinking about technique that helps advance the plot. The most obvious are music and pace, and the pace of the cutting. The music is continually telling us what to think and how to feel about a scene, or it's constantly signaling us what's happening in terms of intensifying action, building toward a climax. The music literally rises to a climactic level. It builds in terms of volume as well as moving up the scale. And what also tends to happen is as the stakes go up in a scene, the editing pattern tends to accelerate. The shots get shorter. The actual, not only does the action intensify, but the frequency of shot changes intensifies. If you look closely at movies, you realize that this happens in individual scenes as well as in the film as a whole, that the film has an arc to it that builds to a climax. And at the same time, individual scenes tend to have the same kind of build and then a return to kind of a resting place to go on to the next scene. If you pay attention to the audio, you really appreciate the sound design. You appreciate the way that music, sound effects, and dialogue are being used together to advance the action.
In the new grandeur of 70mm and full stereophonic sound.
And when we think of a scene like the burning of Atlanta, it's probably the best example of a scene where there's an extremely complicated sound design that's being married to very striking visual aspects. There's a rising tension throughout the scene that is accomplished via all kinds of things, including what's going on with the sound, the intensifying musical composition as well as the sound effects, what's going on with dialogue, and what we're seeing actually visually as the sequence develops. And it does indeed build to that climactic explosion. It's worth thinking about what's being done to encourage us to identify with Rhett and Scarlett, but also to appreciate the devastation, the spectacle, etc.
The American Civil War provides the vast background for the immortal love story of Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara in Margaret Mitchell's Story of the Old South.
All young film critics should rest assured that no matter how conscious you become of these things, you still get lost in a good movie, and you'll always get lost in a good movie, which is what makes it so interesting. But at the same time, if you want to be a decent critic, you've got to learn to after the first viewing, you should always get lost the first time around, but you should learn to go back and look at something and to step back and to think why what are the decisions that are being made by the people making this movie, and why are they doing it that way? Why the camera here and not there? Why this performance? Why this casting decision? Why this line of dialogue? Why develop the story this way? Young critics need to learn to disengage themselves this way and to think critically. I mean, to think analytically, to analyze what it is that's making the film work at this moment.